And we are back. Steve, can you hear me now? Uh, can you hear me, Steve? Test, 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 test.
Hey guys, I want to know if anybody can hear me. Steve, I think your speaker has gone out. My name is Dan Fishman, and I believe that I am broadcasting live right now. And hopefully somebody can tune in and tell me that I am broadcasting live because I would like to know that. I'm listening right now. I'm on with Steve Kerbel, who is the author of a great book called 50 uh, Best Intentions. Um, and Steve and I are wondering who can hear each other. Uh, I can hear you, Steve. Uh, let's just see. People for Liberty. This is very exciting. Um, I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this. Uh, so, welcome back to another People for Liberty, Liberty Lunch. My name is Dan Fishman. I am the executive director of People for Liberty, and I am on with Steve Kerbel. Uh, and unfortunately, Steve's having a little bit of technical difficulties right now. So I want to talk about a little bit about Steve's book. Let's see if we've got him back right now. Steve, I'm hoping that you are there. Let me know. I am also listening online on my Facebook chat. So I know on the Facebook channel. So I know that I am actually live right now. I know that people can hear me, and I'm excited about that. Steve is going to pop right back in, but I want to talk a little bit about the author series that we're starting right now on People for Liberty. The idea is pretty simple, right? People have a lot of ideas about the liberty movement, about freedom, about human respect. There's a bunch of podcasts out there, there's a bunch of blogs. There's something about the art of a book, writing a book, and the art of writing a book, also being able to sit down and actually think about a book and going back and revisit it. We read books differently than we do blogs, than we consume podcasts. There's something about that process. And, we all have a bunch of favorite Liberty books. One of mine is um, the Fatal Conceit by Frederick Hayek. Now, a lot of people have read The Road to Serfdom, which is a classic libertarian text. The Fatal Conceit, it's interesting because I own a physical copy of it. I can't reach it from here, but it's a book that I go back to all the time. So having that book and going back and realizing that it means different things to me at different times. And so the basic premise behind the Fatal Conceit is Hayek says it's important to look at this amazing world that we live in and recognize the fact that none of this amazing world that we live in happened because of government planning. It happened because entrepreneurs taking a chance, people trying to make their lives better and competing against each other, gave us this amazing force where the best always rises to the top. And I heard somebody talking about this the other day in reference to evolution. So here's the thing. In evolution, the C students survive. You look at, there's a lot of animals in the world, and they have a lot of weird features in their lives, things that they're not bad enough to kill them off evolutionarily, right? Like, for example, we're not a perfect species because we're mortal. But we are reproductive when we're young and healthy, and that works really well for evolution. So evolution's like, that's fine. C student can go ahead. But in business, if you're a C student, somebody's going to come along and be a B student and try to put you out of business. And that's going to deliver a better service to the people who are out there. So when I first read that, I read it, the first time I read the Fatal Conceit, it was like 2000, just on the cusp of the real internet revolution, and I understood the idea. I'm like, yeah, look at this. We have all these great things coming along, and Amazon is replacing bookstores, and email is replacing regular mail. Little did I know how much the revolution would actually happen over the next 20 years. I just reread The Fatal Conceit, and it made things better. Steve, can you hear me now?
I can. Yeah, I had a wardrobe malfunction in the earbuds, so now I have these.
Let me tell you that this is the best kind of wardrobe malfunction that could have happened. So I will take it at that. So I was just talking about, one of the interesting things about a book is that we read a book differently than we read a blog or a newspaper or listen to a podcast. It's one of those things that it's a long consumption. You sit down and you go back to it. And so that being said, a book being long in the consuming, it's probably even longer in the writing. What made you think, I want to write a book?
It's funny. Writing a book for me, it starts as an impulse because I just sit down. I write kind of therapeutically anyway. I just get up and I just start writing,
Yeah.
and then when I keep going and going and going, I realize I got a book going. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I get started. This is my second book. It's the first one that's been available for sale to the public, but it just kind of started because I guess I was in the mood, and then once I get enough going, then I just keep going until I have a book. So for me, it's just usually when I write, I get motivated by something, some current event or some realization, something I recognize that maybe I'd like other people to see as well, because I realize, hey, how come nobody seems to get this? And so it makes me write, and so I'll do a column most every day. But the books, this one of course takes a lot more time than just a column.
Sure. Well, so now that's the interesting thing. You said that you wrote one book that's not available for the public. Did you start that as sort of an exercise for yourself? What is, because so I will confess that I did the same thing. When the first time I ran for office, I said, you know what, I need to organize my thoughts, and nothing does that better than writing, because in writing you get a chance to go back and revise, put things exactly the way you want to, which is different from speaking when you're running for office. And I found that writing helped me with my speaking when I ran for office later on. So tell me, that we weren't going down this path, but already you mentioned it. And so there's the first book that's not available for the general public. Is that just for you? Did you give it away to friends? And why'd you do it?
Once again, that was motivated. This was 2014,
Mm-hmm.
before I really got involved in getting out there and doing anything political. Again, I was just motivated to start writing, and I did. And that first one, which of course the title even escapes me today. It was quite a while ago, but it was basically about the same kind of misconceptions and kind of a 12 different points that I noticed about what fights against freedom. And of course, being in the libertarian world, a lot of us realize that the growth of government is the biggest enemy of freedom.
Sure.
And so, but a lot of people have varying degrees of thinking how organized is the evil. And so
Right.
back 8 years ago, I guess I might not have realized quite how organized it really is. So
Right.
I've learned a lot, yeah, it's a lot more organized than what I thought. But maybe that's what kind of led up to the best of intentions, because in realizing the average person, they don't think evil, they just follow a team,
Yeah.
and so they vote for someone because they think they're on the right team, and that team may represent what they want. And so when they're coming up with these ideas, they're voting for people with the best of intentions. They don't want to vote for evil people. Sometimes they'll look the other way,
Sure.
just because they share the right initial. But I think it was just for me. It's just I just get motivated and I start writing, and then whatever it becomes, it becomes.
So then let's talk about this book, which, being a lot more deliberate, it's got a title to it. and that title is The Best of Intentions. And that's a phrase that libertarians use a lot, but I think in general, it's something that if we talk about, when somebody says the best of intentions, they're always saying, but it had a bad result. Can you talk about like why you chose that title for this book?
I think that when people get involved in politics at any level, they do it because they want to do good. And so those intentions are almost universally. Very few people get into politics because they want to get rich off it, because most people don't.
Yep.
And so they get in there wanting to make what they believe is a positive change, to make laws or to remove laws, in most of our case, to remove as many as we can. But the intention is to make things better for people, and people that they care about, people they don't know. And so they're very innocent in their involvement. And so when they get in, their first entry, whether it's a politician, and speaking here of politicians and voters, most people still act with the best of intentions. But politics, it's funny. This has to be 30 years ago. I was with a company and they were training me to be a lobbyist. I'll never forget them telling me sometimes it's just better not to know how the sausage is made.
Sure.
I know you've heard that.
Famous
But it's true, because if you really understand what goes on behind the scenes in the creation of laws, by the time they make it to a vote, it's pretty rare that they're even close to their original plan. And so I guess when I talk about the best of intentions, I think that for politicians, it's kind of a metamorphosis from turning from, I'm fresh and green and I'm going to do the best I can and I'm going to make this country great and all this kind of stuff. And then they get, in the mud and,
right.
and they become part of the sausage. The voters rarely get beyond that point because they're, like I say, we've run into this so many times, is that they're married to a political party. And so that is their good intention, but they are not willing to let in enough factual information, or enough anecdotal information about, when their team does something just abhorrent, that they're willing to look at that act and recognize that it's bad. So, I guess I don't know where the voter turns, but I'd like to believe in the good of most people. Right. And I think that most people who are married to a political party they just have a shield to new information, but they still intend to do good things.
It's interesting because I was having that conversation the other day and said, there are a lot of people who engage with the partisan parties, not recognizing the fact that partisanship is in fact the most disrespectful behavior that you can have, because you're saying I'm in favor of my party over all of these other people. And so when we talk about the best of intentions, I think you're right. There are a lot of people out there who mean well. And it's interesting. You said something about, most politicians aren't in it for the money. I agree that most politicians are in it for the power, but they do seem to end up with a lot of money as well. There's a fascinating statistic about people's wealth when they enter the House of Representatives and when they leave the House of Representatives, and usually they've increased it tenfold, which is a pretty crazy thing. And in that space, though, so we're talking about the best of intentions, and we have this idea that everybody does, or most people are fundamentally good. They have good intentions. Why then are so many people hell bent on using the government to tell other people how to live their lives? I mean, how do we resolve that against people fundamentally wanting to be good?
That's a really good question, Dan. I mean, I don't want to sound too extreme here, but maybe I am in some ways. But if the same folks control the schools, that control the media, and these same folks want to build their influence and power by controlling the schools and the media, then people come out of schools with the intention that government can be the alpha and the omega and the only way of solving problems. Then when they start watching the media, the bulk of it, they start going, oh yeah, that is true. Yay, government. And so I think that they're programmed from a young age that government is the solution to everything. They don't think about the force, the power, the kind of dirty stuff that goes along with it. They just think, well, this is a free country and therefore we have to use the people, the government by the people to do what we need to do, and I don't think they recognize just how far out of control much of our government has become. But they just, not to mention the fact that wasn't it Mark Twain that said that it's easier to sell a person on an idea than it is to convince them that they were wrong about that, or something paraphrased?
I'm not sure if it's Twain, but for sure it's an obvious truth. Anybody who's done it knows that that's exactly where people are. And a lot of times people are so invested in having said, "Oh yeah, that's my idea," that they will fight to not have to say that they were wrong, because they think that there's some sort of, I don't know. I guess we're trained through a lot of the school system, stuff like that, to not say that we're wrong about certain things, because we're taught from a school system that teaches there's an idea of a sort of an absolute morality, and if you say that you're wrong, then you're questioning that morality. It's certainly a weird place to be. I have a friend who says you're not going to get anywhere trying to convince Americans that they should be free, because most Americans will tell you they already are free.
Yeah, they don't know. I mean, because that's what we're taught to believe. I mean, but if you look at the myriad laws, regulations, and other rules out there, and just think to yourself for a moment, think of something that's not illegal or regulated. It's kind of hard to come up with anything like that. And how free is that?
Yep.
They think about the Boston Tea Party, that kind of rebellion over a tiny little tax on tea, and they had so much more freedom than we do now.
Yep.
Under King George III. But
Yep.
people, they don't make that leap. I think the other thing that people fail to realize is that power is bad. The desire for power is a bad human trait. And so, and it's also addictive. Kind of like, if you have wealth, you want more and more wealth. Okay, that's great. You can buy more stuff and have more security. That's fine. But when you start getting a taste of power and you relish that power and you want more and more power, that's when I think the intentions begin to turn. I don't think you have good intentions at that point anymore, because you're feeding your desire for power. And that's the problem. I mentioned somewhere in the book that, people, especially people of one persuasion, believe that business is evil. Corporations are evil. Everything we're doing, a profit motive, is evil. And so we don't trust people. So what are we going to do? We're going to get people more power to go after all these other people, and assuming that some people are going to be good and some people are going to be bad. The whole formula is flawed.
You bring two things up there that I want to talk about a little bit. One of them is, we talk about the founding fathers, and there's a great statement that when the Americans rebelled, they were rebelling against what was, without question, the freest nation in the world, right?
Yeah.
Compared to anybody else, England is the freest nation in the world. They have a rising House of Commons. The power of the monarchy is limited. It's the freest. But Americans didn't want to be the freest. They wanted to be free. And that's a big difference. And now we seem to have moved away from that somehow people have convinced a lot of the country that they really actually don't want to be completely free. They want to have some things taken care of. And so we have that problem. Now, you mentioned the fact that you mentioned this in your book. We're talking about your book. I hope everybody looks down at the bottom and see you can buy Steve's book right now, tinyurl.com/Steve Kerbel, Kerbel, tinyurl.com/Steve Kerbel. That'll take you to the Amazon page. If somehow you forget, go to Amazon and search for The Best of Intentions, 50 Thoughts on Freedom, and you can find the book as well. It has very recently been #1 in political science. These things go up and down, but one of the big pluses right now is that if you know somebody this would be a good Christmas present for, a good Hanukkah present for, you can buy it right now and have it delivered on their Kindle like that. So let's talk about the book a little bit, Steve. And, it's 50 Thoughts on Freedom. What was the one thought that started you on this process? What was the first thought that bring you into the book?
Well, I think it was more in the first half, which is The Best of Intentions. 50 Thoughts on Freedom is a series of essays I wrote over 4 years that I conglomerated in the back. But the beginning, the 50 Thoughts on Freedom, which is The Best of Intentions, that I think I really want to wake people up to recognize the dangers of a large centralized government. because right now, if you look at what's happened over the years, and people have become hopeless about buying homes, about how are they going to cover their health care, what are they going to do about education, all these hot buttons, and now they're bringing in people. Look, they need help, so and becoming up through the public school system, the only help they can think of is, well, let's let the government take care of it. But the government's what messed it up to begin with, and so they look toward, well, let's build more government. And of course, that world democratic socialism has been thrown around quite a bit, and so when you do that, people go, yeah, that's not so bad. It could work, and then of course the problem with that is, and I don't really have a problem with safety nets. I think they're fine. My problem is when you have a centralized government that goes along with that. That's where the evil of power gets conglomerated. And that's why, it's funny, I was listening to AOC talk a couple of years back, and it sounded awfully familiar what she was saying, because when I went back, I found that exact statement in an essay by Vladimir Lenin in 1897.
Yeah.
And so it's like, wow, all right, well, I knew I'd heard this before. And so the problem is they keep going back to the same thing, large centralized government. And large centralized government always ends up turning more and more power hungry. And it becomes dirty, it becomes nasty, it becomes more concerned with compliance than anything else. Common sense is gone, force takes over, and so look what happened with the Soviet Union. Following Marx, Lenin, and comes Stalin. And all of a sudden, we've got people on every corner listening to what everyone's saying, and you can't talk anymore. And now people are being political prisoners for saying hello. There's no constitution that protects them. And then I see people now here in the United States, and they're saying, yay, socialism. Okay, once again, I'm fine with a safety net. Don't fall. That's great. But at the same time, you just can't have this strong centralized power. So what I wanted to do is I wanted people, this book starts out fairly innocuous. It is a scientific view, a political scientific view of the American political system. But then as you get more into it, it becomes more and more examples of how things went wrong in the world. And then, it ends up with kind of a shocking result of what could happen here if the socialists win. And so what I really wanted to do is get this book in as many hands as possible, so people can go, oh, maybe it would happen here. Because right now, it'll never happen here. Well, how many times have we heard that before? Of course it'll. The minute you give somebody too much power, they're going to abuse it. Yep. Every single time. It's a human flaw.
Well, and I think that every place where people have said, it can never happen here, it happens, right? I mean, so far, every place, we were talking earlier about the fact that England was the freest nation in the world. You could argue that after the United States, they're still among the freest, the most capitalistic free market society. On the other hand, in your lifetime and mine, the English government took over Land Rover, right? The old British city said, you know what? We're not going to allow that to be privately owned anymore. The government is going to run this company, which is pretty crazy. And the interesting thing about that, too, is you talk about socialism. For me, one of the most frustrating conversations about socialism is that so few people understand what socialism actually is. People think that socialism is social welfare, but really socialism is just the government controlling the means of production. Right. But the thing about it is that if the government controls the means of production, that's a much broader definition. And all the time, this is before we legalized cannabis in Massachusetts, I would argue with socialists on the radio. And I will say, I prefer arguing with a socialist or Marxist rather than arguing with a Republican or a Democrat. Because Republicans and Democrats have no idea what they stand for. They have no idea what their political philosophy is. Maybe they can quote somebody saying, at least a socialist and almost always a Marxist know their political philosophy and are willing to argue it. Now, socialists, they understand that they have to camouflage their philosophy a little bit, because if they tell you the truth right away, you're going to be abhorred by it. And I used to always say to socialists, I would say, let me ask you this. Would your local drug dealer be allowed to sell you drugs under socialism? Of course, the answer is no. Would Uber work under socialism? No, nobody would be allowed to use Uber under socialism, because taxis actually are an example of socialism. That is the government controlling the means of production. And the thing is, too, you and I remember how gross taxi cabs used to be. The younger generation has no idea. They're like, oh, yeah, Uber, Lyft, taxis, they're all so clean and wonderful. But it really is insidious what happens when the government controls the means of production. And anybody who says that can't happen here doesn't remember what just happened during the pandemic. And, the government ordered some companies to make respirators, which of course ended up being completely useless, which is, everything the government does. The government closed a bunch of businesses. All these terrible things you say can't happen here. It just happened. So I'm glad that your book is out right now, and I'm glad there's an opportunity for people to get it and to read it. But most importantly, to read it and then talk about it with other people. Because that's the other thing, right? This message has to be, the book's only going to be read, and here's the problem with the book, right? It's only going to be read by the people who can read books, and it's only going to be read by the people who are actually open-minded enough to read something that doesn't tell them everything that they've heard beforehand. But this book serves the purpose of, it gives them tools to have conversations with other people. And so let's talk about some of the other essays that you have in the back. The first one obviously is that, power, government, centralized government power is always a mistake. It always corrupts. But there's more to it. You have more essays than that. What are some of the other ones that, like, if you were going to say, okay, here's the short version, what makes the top 5 list?
Well, the 50 thoughts part, it comes from all over the place.
Yep.
Because it was written over 4 years. But one of the overriding themes is it should make someone of any viewpoint think, depending on which essay they run into.
Right.
Because they're not one-sided. They come from everywhere. Like, for example, talking about the left. I guess both sides operate on fear, but the left is a little more obvious about it right now. And
Yep.
so, they're calling, if you don't believe in that climate change will kill us all tomorrow, you're a science denier. Well,
Exactly.
I don't know any scientists that say that, but so I bring up the question, are you a science denier if you believe a different scientist than what everyone else tells you to believe? Those kind of thoughts, because the problem is what we get is one-sided stuff. And I believe there are two sides to every story. And there's been such an attempt to censor and control speech in the country recently, just because they're uncomfortable hearing the other side. They set their mind. I want people to think about both sides when they come to a conclusion. What I really want them to do is to be able to do critical thinking. And so that's why I bring up these examples. And I'm sure that some people will be infuriated when they read some of these things, because their mind is set. This is the truth. And nowadays, one of the things that's really driving me insane when in political discourse is there are some people that are so sure of their opinion, and I say opinion because nobody really knows, that if you dare to provide an opposing view, they tell them you're gaslighting them, because they're so sure of themselves that you couldn't possibly believe what you're saying, so you're gaslighting me. And of course that just makes me crazy. But I think what happens is it's that one-sided control of information that's brought us to this point. So just off the top of my head, let's see if I can grab a good one here.
Well, while you look that up, I'll talk about the fact that there is, one of the things that you hear people say a lot is, it's terrible that the media is so biased. I always come back to that and I say, I'm glad the media is biased, because Fox is covering things that MSNBC would never cover.
Right.
Likewise, MSNBC covers stuff that Fox would just prefer to bury. Like, for example, I'll tell you a funny story from my past. I went to school in England for a year, for what the kids nowadays would call a gap year. And we studied, I took my A-levels, and I did a specialization in the French Revolution. And one of the things that we did was, for 6 weeks, all we read was primary documents, meaning newspapers, newspapers and journals of the time. And so there were 4 primary newspapers in Paris. There was The People's newspaper, which came out every day, was very cheap, but people would buy it in sort of general news. There was a merchant's newspaper, there was a clerical newspaper for the church, and then there was a newspaper for the royalists, for the king, stuff like that, had all sorts of illustrations and what the queen was wearing and stuff like that. The day after the storming of the Bastille, in the People's newspaper, it says, Bastille stormed, prisoners set free, viva la revolution. In the merchant's newspaper, it says, terrible traffic jam at the Bastille, fish spoils on wagons, unable to get through. In the clerical newspaper, it says, hundreds of people hurt at the Bastille, church administers aid. And in the royalist newspaper, it says, the king went falconing today. The news media has always been biased. And so rather than curse the bias, we should appreciate the fact that we live in a place where there can be news with bias for and against everything and consume it all rather than just going to one source.
It's a good point. The other thing about the media, I think one of the reasons it's so noticeable now is that where there used to be many, many owners of media sources, it's down to very few. And those few are so powerful that they have political interests. And that's why, like you say, if you watch MSNBC, you have no idea what's going on Twitter. If you watch Fox, you're aware of January 6th, you just don't care much about it. MSNBC, it's funny, I'm always curious about media sources and how biased or unbiased they are. So I have my own little test. Now, CNN has come more towards the middle lately, which is much appreciated, but they were almost as bad as MSNBC on the left.
Yep.
But all I do is I just go onto their homepage, I hit Control F, and in that space I type Trump. See how many times they're mentioned. Like Fox usually mentions them maybe 2 times, CNN maybe 4 times, MSNBC around 16. So it's what I notice is they're focused on one thing. Let's get I want people to be mad about Trump, and so basically the media is just it's so transparent. But at the same time, I even catch myself sometimes now. And it's no secret I'm more annoyed by the left than the right at this moment, but I'm pretty sure that's about to change since the right has now taken over the Congress, and the same baloney is going to happen there. But there's some things I just can't stand to watch. It gets my hackles up because it's just so transparently obnoxious and annoying. I know they're lying, and it's stupid. And sometimes I wonder, how can they do some things that are so completely ridiculous and make them headlines all the time? I suspect that's to keep our eye off the ball of what's really happening.
I agree,
but,
100%.
It's even hard for me to watch, so especially MSNBC. It's like I skip that one quite a bit because it really drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I liked Rachel Maddow's show. I thought that she was a very smart person. She was definitely biased. But there could be lots of smart people that I disagree with, and I'm going to be smarter by listening to smart people. A lot of times, I think that if you are an active thinker, you want somebody to try to poke holes in your arguments because you want your arguments to be the best they can be. You welcome those challenges. And somebody pointed out that the biggest difference between science and religion is that real science welcomes challenges. In fact, it's
Right.
part of the scientific method. Try to disprove this theory. Do your best. Bring us evidence. In religion, when you try to disprove something, that's actually blasphemy, right? That's heresy.
Right.
It is a specific crime. And so anytime that we're in a place where somebody says, well, you're not allowed to ask that question, you're not allowed to say those things, we should know that we're not talking about an honest conversation anymore. We're talking about a religion, a blind faith. And that's where we've sort of been broken. The question, of course, though, is how to fix it. And one of the interesting things, I'm going to talk about just 1 second here about People for Liberty. One of the things that we've been doing recently, I recently reread Lenin, but also Saul Alinsky, some of the famous socialist agitators. And one of the things that they talk about is to try to get people to do socialist things without calling it socialism.
Yeah.
And without them understanding. And I've been thinking, why can't we do that? Why can't we get people to do things that are actually freedom things without them saying, oh, it's actually a freedom thing? And then I thought about it, and I'm like, Well, there's nothing more freedom oriented than starting your own business, right? Being your own boss. That's about as free as we can get. And so I've been thinking about, how do we do that? How do we get more people to become their own boss? We're in this work from home environment and stuff like that. And, for you, 50 thoughts on freedom. What do you think about that idea? Because, I mean, you actually, right, you owned a business at one point in time.
That's a good point, Dan. Being able to understand all sides makes you a better communicator. There's no doubt about it. And I've had various views. I mean, I used to lean a little bit more left than I did to the right, and so that's probably why I'm better versed in speaking to people from the left. But at the same time, I just think that they went so far they lost me. But at the same time, I've always tried to shape arguments that anyone can understand. Like, for example, I mean, if I'm talking to a young socialist, first of all, young people, one of the reasons I think that they move towards socialism is it's their education, but on top of that, they're exuberant. They want to solve things, and if you want to solve things, you become a central planner, because I know how to fix everything, so everyone else becomes a chessboard. And so, they don't really get past that until they've lived life long enough to realize that what you're really craving is the right to make your own decisions and not to have someone else deciding for you. So it's very important that you can speak to people. But when I speak to young people, and I don't know if you've seen any of my videos, I have a lot of videos I've made out on a Facebook page and a YouTube called the Kerbel Academy. And in those, I address things like a lot of socialist things, like healthcare and things like that. And you have to make the assumption that the people's worries and complaints are legitimate. Because if you just talk down to them and say, well, I'm better than you and you're stupid and blah, 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 you're not going to gain any people backing you or interested in what you have to say, because they just think you're a jerk. And so that's where you run into with a lot of people, that get active politically, is they become condescending rather than helpful. But I'm very willing to put out there and say, look, I know you're struggling with housing. I know you're struggling with healthcare. I know you're struggling with education. And you're looking for a way to solve that. But the only thing in their arsenal is the same entities that made everything so expensive.
Right.
So they're going, hey, more government. Yeah, that'll solve the problem that government created. And so it's
Exactly.
like you have to be able to, and the other thing too is you have to be able to prove to them and say, yeah, you're right. Your concerns are quite legitimate. I share them, but I don't share your solution, because I think that the solution you're coming up with will only make your life more difficult. So how do we make your life better? Let's cut the government and see what happens, and I'll show you step by step how, when you do that, your life will get better. These things will come in line financially, and all of a sudden you're going to find that that hopelessness and fear that seems so pervasive among youth today is going to get a lot worse if you get the government out of the way. So you have to be able to make a complete argument. You can't lecture. Asking questions is helpful, but the big thing is you have to be able to relate to people in order to talk to them.
One of my favorite Harry Brown quotes is, government breaks your legs and then expects you to thank them for providing you with health care. It is one of those things that people are so trapped in this cycle that they can't see their way out. And they've been conditioned by government to think that government is the only answer. And so when you try to say, oh, there's another solution, they think you're the most dangerous enemy out there, when in reality, you're actually advocating for them and their freedom. So I want to go back to Kara Svoboda. Kara, thanks for tuning in. Where is the Kerbel Academy? So I also heard you mention that. You said there's a series of essays. Is there a website? Is there a Facebook?
It's a Facebook page. That's the one that's gotten most of the hits. Some of those videos have had 10,000 people.
Wow.
But there's a Facebook page called the Kerbel Academy,
Okay.
and I also have a YouTube page. But I'm not an expert at social media, so you'll get 7 people watching that. But Facebook, the Facebook page is where you find these videos. I made quite a few of them, and some of them were pretty good. I got better with the technology over the years. In the beginning, it was kind of horrible, but some of them I look back now, and I think that the message is very strong.
Yeah, so I see the Kerbel Academy, if you search for it. And that's another good picture. We were talking earlier about headshots and stuff. Let me share this up for everybody to see. So here it is. This is the Kerbel Academy, spelled just like that. If you look, there's a lot of people in here, including a lot of people I know. He's going to be making more videos, links, stuff like that. We should have shared this page with the broadcast. But now people know you can search for the Kerbel Academy on Facebook, find this page. So you got the book. You apparently have this movie site, this Facebook page with a lot of educational stuff out there. You're clearly in the liberty education business, or liberty education. You're not getting paid for it, so we can't call it a racket. Why? Why at this point in time you could have a comfortable life, Steve? I mean, we talked earlier. You were a business person, successful, stuff like that, but some things called you to public service, and obviously, we talked briefly about the fact you ran for president in 2016. You traveled around.
It's funny. I ran medium to large size companies for 20 years,
Yep.
and I was pretty naive about government. I didn't realize that government, it doesn't care about the results of its actions. It comes after people, and it comes after people that they shouldn't come after. And so I began to think, yeah, I've got licenses in all these states. I just pay them and they leave me alone. Well, then all of a sudden, they start knocking on your door. And when they knock on your door, it's never friendly and it's never reasonable. And it's rarely, and they never seem to care about the results of their actions. So I thought, wow, okay, this is not what people think this is. And I need people to know that, if you're in business, for example, you think your biggest enemy is your competition. Your biggest enemy is not. Your biggest enemy is regulators followed by lawsuits. That's your biggest enemy. And people don't know that. And so when they're going through school, business college, for example, maybe they know, well, you have to have your infrastructure in place. You have to have your staffing plans and your financial plans and things like that. But in reality, if you don't know who the enemy is, you don't know how to protect yourself against the enemy. And so I wanted to get the word out to people in this country about the real world, because it woke me up with such strength and shock that all of a sudden I was no longer naive and I was no longer asleep. And I realized, well, this is not what anyone planned for this country to become. And so then it began expanding into, oh my God, it's everywhere. It's not just regulation. It's, I came up with a law in 2018. It was a group called Stop the Shakedowns.
I love this.
The plan there was to make a ballot initiative in the state of Colorado that said, okay, guess what? The government can't have fines and fees anymore. If there's a fine, it goes to the victim if there is one, or a charity if there's not. And so what happens is it takes away that, give me the money and I'll put it in my pocket, that everyone thinks happens. And I believe that, it's funny, some people thought that was anti-police. I say it's the most pro-police law there could have been, because when people get pulled over, they think, oh, you're just ripping me off. But if everyone knows it's going to help people, all of a sudden that probably makes the streets a lot more peaceful. Yep. So I actually got that through the Capitol onto the streets for petitioning, and didn't quite get there because I miscalculated on one thing, is that we needed 100,000 signatures to get it on there, and I figured that the charities would help me do it. But they were probably afraid of retribution and the loss of their tax-exempt status. So we got 10 or 20,000 signatures just with volunteers, but I really needed to put together a bunch of money. If I ever do it again, I'll do it right. But those are the kind of things, and I believe that would pass. We even did an independent survey, a poll through a professional polling group, and it would have passed. And the reason why is because not everyone has done business and got attacked by a regulator that did stuff they wish they didn't do. Right. But almost everyone has gotten a ticket they didn't think was legitimate.
Yep.
And so those are the ones who would vote yes.
Right.
So if I ever decide to do that again, it'll pass. It'll be law, and I think it'll be beneficial. It also would have probably would have taken a lot of homeless off the streets too. Because the state said it was going to be $250 million would have been taken away from the state.
There's a great song by Woody Guthrie called Pretty Boy Floyd, and it's got a lyric in it that says, some people rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of these laws are. And the idea of taking away financial incentive for enforcing law, just enforce the law because it's the law. That ought to be enough.
But it would mean
And
something if they didn't get the money.
yep, and we got David Valente agrees with us. A great way to end policing for profit. Um,
Right.
there is an interesting idea in there too that you talk about that's behind that is that in some states you can still do laws by petition. People can actually make their own laws. And I wish more people were taking advantage of that in trying to introduce legislation because it gives you the best insight into how government actually works. Because here were you, a citizen, trying to get a law made, and you end up being fought. You had to jump through hoops, all these things, when in fact your intentions really were the best possible. You weren't making a
Yeah.
law that was going to make you any money or anything like that. What you said the next time you do it, it's going to pass. What are you going to do differently next time if you're going to try to do
Fundraise in
that?
advance.
I'm sorry, what?
I'd fundraise in advance. I mean, you need to get it on the ballot. Probably need $500,000.
Yeah.
And I think I know the people that would come up with it. I just haven't had the, to do something like that takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ever do it again, but if I do, I'll talk to the people who would fund it first and then get started again.
Well, and obviously, I think everybody who thinks this is a good idea could fund it a little bit by buying your book, which is for sale at tinyurl.com/Steve Kerbel. We also talked about the Kerbel Academy, and I'm going to say again, Kerbel. There is some game out there that spells Kerbel differently. Ignore that game. Steve Kerbel, Kerbel, tinyurl.com/Steve Kerbel. The book is called The Best of Intentions, 50 Thoughts on Freedom. We got about 8 minutes left here. Let me ask you, what do you think is the thing that makes it easiest to communicate with somebody who's not really living in a freedom, in a happy spot for freedom? What's the thing that wakes them up the most? Actually, I wanted to say two things. First of all, you talked about waking up, being woken up. And one of my pet peeves right now is that there is a lot of people who are speaking against the word woke because they think that it means left-leaning philosophy. And a lot of people use it that way. But the opposite of woke is asleep. And so I've been trying to tell people, don't just wake up to one idea. Wake up to all the ideas. And so I was encouraged to hear you say, you waking up. What do you think is the message that is the easiest to use to help people to wake up to what's actually happening?
Well, it's different for everyone. I think that you may remember you first met me in the Massachusetts debate in
Yep,
2015.
you were a presidential candidate. It was actually 2015 for the
and after that
2016
debate,
election.
After that debate, someone came from the crowd and challenged me. There were 4 of us there. They said, you're speaking to the choir here. But you see those guys over there watching football, eating popcorn and drinking beer? Sell them. So I said, okay. So I went over there. And one of the ways that you can get people to listen first is by asking questions. And so I just said, hey guys, I'm so sorry to interrupt your football game, but you kind of are here at a political convention. And so some people asked me to talk to you and see if you can, if you're willing to listen and if you can agree with what we have to say. And so I just asked them a few questions, establish a rapport, listen to what mattered to them, answered how what we could do could make their lives better. And by the end, one of the guys said, hey, what's your name again? I'm voting for you. So there is no magic key. The key is you have to listen. You have to understand. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to and understand why your answers will make their life better. Because the nice thing about shrinking government, the only people it hurts is government. Because everybody else benefits. Because cost of everything goes down. You can do more things without getting in trouble. You can follow your dreams without so many barriers in the way. And so, you just have to be able to explain to people how that is. Now, sometimes it's more challenging because sometimes they are just mired in one side or the other with such power that you can't talk to them. And that's okay, because I have to assume there's probably 20% on each side that you just can't talk to. But that leaves 60% in the middle. They're probably willing to listen to something different. And so they're the ones I like to talk with.
That's it's it's a great thing to close on, because I agree 100% that idea of asking people and they'll tell you what's important to them, and then you know which message to bring them. Because I think most of us who've been in the liberty movement a long time have every message in our backpack. We can bring out every one. You just have to know which one to be able to bring out. And there's a Chris Rock, who's one of my favorite comedians, has a great routine where he says, "Guys, I'm going to give you some advice about dealing with women. Women say they want you to talk, 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 but really what they want you to do is listen, listen, listen. All you have to do is say, 'Tell me about your day,' and then you can kind of put your mind on break for 10 minutes, and you'll have done everything you have to do because you're listening to somebody." And it's the same thing for us in spreading the message. I saw a great post on Twitter by a pretty famous libertarian who said, "Libertarians have the best message in the world and the worst salesman." And there is a lot to be said for that, because a lot of us think that the revelation is so obvious that everybody who doesn't get it is stupid. And it's not that
Yeah.
they're stupid. They haven't had the benefit of all the epiphany moment, the wake moment that all the rest of us came through. I will confess, I was a Reagan Republican back in the day. I thought that that's where I wanted to go until Jerry Falwell convinced me that people like Fishman didn't make good Republicans. So it was a nice wake up for me. So we've got the URL at the bottom for how people can buy the book. I'm getting a couple messages behind the scenes, people who want to book you on their podcast now. How do people get in touch with you for that, Steve?
Well, actually, if you want, they can contact you, and then you can pass it along. That's probably the best way to do it. I did want to say one more thing. You brought up Chris Rock?
Yes.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes or 1 minute for a story?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So in 2016, after I quit the race, I joined up with Gary Johnson. And I was helping him out in the general election.
Yeah.
And by the way, Gary endorsed this book. If you look at the back cover, there's an endorsement from Gary.
Yeah.
But I remember we were one of the hardest fights we had was to get into the debates because we were excluded from the debates. And Chris Rock had a movie called Head of State. Right. Love that movie. Yeah. Now, he became the nominee for president because the other candidates died in a plane crash. And I remember him saying, well, one of the news stations didn't even cover it, but that's beside the point. So he basically shamed the vice president into appearing on the debates by getting everywhere, just chiding him and trying to get him on the debates. I remember telling Gary, that's what you got to do. You got to drive them so crazy that they have to let you into the debates. So when you remind me of Chris Rock, I remember that story, and that's the way to do it. You just got to be so loud and just be in everyone's face so much in order to be permitted. But that's a story for another day as far as why that's locked out. But yes, I'm a fan of Chris Rock as well.
Well, that's wonderful. So thank you everybody for tuning in. My name is Dan Fishman. I'm the executive director of People for Liberty, and you've been watching the first in our author series. Coming up, we have Murray Sabrin, who has just released a new book on economics, and then we have a mystery guest with a mystery book that's going to be coming out in February. So I hope you will tune into our January author series, our February author series, and make sure to go to tinyurl.com/Steve Kerbel. Check out Steve's book. You can get it right now as a present. And then the last thing, for those of you watching on YouTube, click that subscribe button. Find out when we go live. Right now, we always have more viewers of our videos than we have subscribers, which means lots of you are missing out on our live broadcast. Click that subscribe button, click the like, click the bell, and on these other pages in Facebook, make sure that you like People for Liberty, find the Kerbel Academy, make sure that you like them, and stay informed. A lot of this battle is finding out what the information is, keeping in touch with the people who are putting out good content, and then helping us by sharing that good content. Please share links to Steve's book. Please share links to this broadcast, and peopleforliberty.org. Our newsletter link is on there. And this is our last broadcast, so I hope everybody has a good holidays, and we will see you guys in the new year. Steve, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Let me click the magic end broadcast, and I'm going to wave